Hi, today I have Mary Clare Garber, and she is the principal of Princeton Legal Search Group. She partners with CEOs, boards, and chief legal officers to solve high stakes legal leadership challenges. For more than 25 years, her focus has been on helping organizations recruit general counsel and senior in-house legal leaders who don't just take a role, they strengthen the entire executive team. Before dedicating her career to legal executive search, she held leadership positions in major organizations, including Merck, Medco, now Express Scripts, and Smith Barney, and managed national accounts for Lee Heck Harrison. Across those roles, she led scale, talent management, succession planning, and executive transitions for high growth companies. Experience that shapes the practical, business focused perspective brought to every engagement today. And in her spare time outside of work, you'll find her at Broadway Theater, exploring museums, training for the next open water swim, always drawn to the new horizons. That is such a great entry into having Mary Clare here in person today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sheryl. That was me swimming. I'm practicing my swim as we speak.
Wow, you're a professional swimmer.
Well, that might infer I get paid to swim. I don't get paid to swim. It's it's not a labor of love, but it's something that I'm passionate about.
And it's very good for you too.
Yes.
So what can we find? Okay, sorry, let me start again. Why companies have found candidates on their own, so why hire a routine search company?
That's a really interesting question. When I was both at Merck Medco and when I came on board, it was Shears Lehman Hutton, became Shears Lehman, went through a number of name changes, became Smith Barney. In those organizations, I was responsible for recruiting executives within the organization from the general manager, director level and above. And I didn't particularly like or want to pay search fees. And the reason I didn't want to do that was because we had either internal talent or we had a wonderful network of executives. Why not find our own? And we certainly had a team of people who could look externally. So you can find the candidates on your own. Great. That's wonderful. But really interesting, in all of those companies, I was never tasked with hiring lawyers for those corporations. And the reason I wasn't tasked for hiring lawyers within those corporations is that legally is a one-off kind of hire. And it's such an unusual hire that to build the team to go out and recruit for one, maybe two lawyers, I think 3 lawyers over the entire course of my career didn't make good economic sense. And as a result, we then engaged with a search firm for legal search.
Excellent. Why not have the existing talent team work on the search? They know the company, the legal team, and the products or services.
They do know the legal team. They do know the products and services, and they certainly know the culture. There's a nuance here, particularly in the legal profession, and there's a parallel analogy to the medical profession. If I have cancer, I'm not going to go to a cardiologist for an oncology problem, and I'm not going to go to an oncologist for a cardiology problem. It wouldn't make sense. I would be in the wrong place. I would be wasting time and money. So although we had a team, a recruiting team, a talent acquisition and succession planning team within those companies, to build a team specifically for legal didn't make sense because the deep dive that's required for people think, and let me just back up a second, people When I say people, professionals, business people think a lawyer is a lawyer is a lawyer. And indeed, that's not true. Like in the medical, you wouldn't hire a mergers and acquisition lawyer if you had an employment issue. And at some of the companies I worked for, there were unions. And you wouldn't hire a labor lawyer for a commercial transaction, right? Or for commercial contract transactions. And you wouldn't hire a clinical contracts lawyer in life sciences for commercial contracts. And the reverse wouldn't be true. Yes, there may be teams, talent acquisition teams in place in companies where it makes sense, whether it's sales, marketing, product development, marketing, research, where there may be a need for more or for repetition of hiring, where you build the teams, you build the bench strength, you build the expertise. But legal is generally a one-off, two-off type of hire to build that expertise and to have somebody know what they're looking for. Let me give you a specific example.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, this comes up quite a bit. And this is actually some of the limitations with the scanning devices. If a company is looking for a commercial contracts lawyer, the scanning device might be looking for contracts. A clinical contracts lawyer is very different than a commercial contracts lawyer. And generally speaking, those two types of lawyers are not interchangeable. There are exceptions where they could be, but generally they're not. Clinical contracts has to do with the building, the developing, and the distribution of the drug, where commercial contracts could be your SaaS agreements. Right? They're just dramatically different, and context matters in the legal environment.
Yes, I'm sure it does.
Yes.
Which is what legal is. Legal recruiting fees are high. Does a retained search cost more money? And how does the fee structure work?
I love this question. Many people think that retained search is more expensive, and I'm not quite sure why they think it's more expensive. It's not. So whatever the negotiated fee is, whether it's 25, 30%, whether it includes a bonus, it includes the short-term incentive, the long-term incentive, and what other variables may be part of that total comp package, that number is a number. And if there's a retained versus a contingent search fee agreement, that percentage, whether it's 25 or 30, is going to be the same on the total comp package, whether, again, it's retained or if it's contingent. The difference is that on a retained search, a third of it is paid up front. Generally speaking, a third is paid when the interview process begins, and the final third is when there's an offer and acceptance. So it's about the structure of the payments. It's not about the totality of the payment. And when a corporation, organization engages with a retained search firm, they're making that commitment up front. In return, the retained search company is making that commitment as well. And there is very much of an alignment, an agreement, and a timeline that both entities have agreed upon. So if I were going to be on the, in a corporation, I would want a retained search agreement because I have more control over the process from the beginning and during the middle, versus in a contingent. Well, if you get me the right person, you may or may not get me the right person, but if you do, then we'll pay the fee agreement. But there's no holding anybody accountable till the very end in a contingent agreement, versus an HR professional does have the ability to say, we meet on a week when we're in a retained search agreement. We prefer to meet on a weekly basis so that we know, the client knows where everybody is.
And do both of those have the same deadline, or are those two different ones?
There's more of a deadline that can be imposed on a retained search agreement because there's no payment made until the interview process. The second payment is not made until the interview process begins. And so it's easy for a client or an organization to say, where are the candidates? Where in a contingent, there's no leverage in a contingent fee agreement for a search firm to produce. They may be working on other searches. They may be actually working on retained searches versus a contingent search, because they're not going to get anything until they produce something.
So you would have been better off retaining them in the first place.
Yes, yes, you got it.
Okay, we already know that the top performers, or if we already know the top performers in our industry, why do we need a search firm?
If an organization knows the top performers, the top legal performers, let's say in IP, intellectual property, if that's what they're looking for, great. Meet with those candidates, meet with those professionals. But we find there are two limitations. One, sometimes those top performers are in the law firm that they're currently engaged with and they can't go directly to the law firm. Or two, they don't have the time and the bandwidth to court those engaged, what we call passive candidates, those candidates who are not looking. And that takes some time, that takes some back and forth. Sometimes lawyers, generally speaking, and there are problems with generalities, if they're risk adverse. And if they're risk adverse, they're not going to jump the first time that they may be tapped on a shoulder. A marketing person may, a salesperson may, an executive may, but generally speaking, this is a more cautious group of professionals who need some time, who need some courting, who need some information. Lawyers are great at preparing for an interview. They come back with all kinds of information about the organization, about the financial stability, projections. They're very well prepared. That particular profile is not somebody who's going to jump right away. So if a company or an organization knows professionals and they can reach out to those professionals, terrific. And when I say we, Princeton Legal Search Group, will carve out somebody or one or two people. I'm not going to say some bodies, but one or two individuals that if a company has a relationship or has begun that initiation with that candidate, let's talk about those candidates and carve them out.
That is great. Okay. If we're the bigger company, how will passive candidates find a search firm like Princeton Legal Search Group?
Yeah, so let's just use Google by way of example.
Okay.
Everybody knows Google, right? And
Right.
you'd have to be living under a rock for a long time not to know Google. And I love Google. This is not about, anything good or bad about Google.
No.
They certainly have name recognition. So why would you engage in a small company like a Princeton Legal Search Group that's a boutique looking for specifically lawyers? We're going to know where those passive candidates are. We have been around for the last 26 years, almost 27 years. So we have a very strong bench strength of relationships, both of those individuals that have been in the profession for a while and potentially new people coming in. And so Google can put an ad out, but that doesn't mean that every lawyer is going to apply. They're not. Again, they're going to be a little bit more cautious by nature. And so if they have a relationship with Princeton Legal Search Group and they're actively engaged in their position, there's a good chance they could miss that Google opening. We can reach out to them directly and they will respond to, when I say they will respond to us, we have very nice long relationships, even for those individuals who may be employed that we have placed. We're not going to contact those lawyers once we've placed them, but they're very generous in sharing their network contacts with us so that we can go to existing, past, and potential candidates, or how we get to those potential newer candidates is through these past prior relationships.
So having that strong relationship helps you down the road for other prospects.
Yes.
Okay.
Even for a Google, who again has got the name recognition, but if people aren't looking and they don't know to look, you might need a Princeton Legal Search Group to tap somebody on the shoulder to say, "Let me just bring this to your attention. Does this make sense in the context of where you are in your career?"
Okay. So search firms have been criticized for not understanding the business or related business relationships, the culture, the inner dynamics of the organization, or the nuances. Here's an example of a rare disease versus a mainstream drug product launch.
Sure. So that's a loaded one.
Yes, it is.
Nobody is going to know the organization better than HR and the general counsel or chief legal officer combined, or if we're recruiting for general counsel, the COO and the CHRO, the chief human resources officer and the executive of the company. We're not going to pretend to be experts in that culture, but what we are going to do is to come in and understand that culture, who thrives in that culture and who may not thrive in that culture. The example that is listed there or that we're referencing there is that this is a very kind of nuanced area, but it's a great example. When we're recruiting in, let's say, life sciences, and there's a rare disease versus a more common disease, the type of lawyer that may go to work for a company in a rare disease might be very different than a lawyer who would be working in a more broad-based diseased area. If we know that if we know that about the organization and we know what their culture is, we're going to know best we can the type of candidate, both in terms of the traits as well as the work style. So, and the traits relate to how that general counsel or lawyer, senior legal leader interacts with the legal team, how they interact with the individual stakeholders in that organization, and how they feel comfortable and confident in the culture as a whole. So those individual relationships and then the broader culture in connection is equally as important. So we would come in and do a diagnostic with the chief human resources officer as well as the CEO to make sure that there's alignment there. Good. And then the final acid test would be from a in-person interview. Is the walk and the talk consistent? Is there alignment with our cultural values and our style of working?
Okay.
You probably know that better than most, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a lot of relationships with lawyers through law firms you hire, like you were just explaining. Why not leverage those relationships?
From an organizational perspective?
Yes.
Yeah. So I may have covered this a little bit, which is there are many law firms have hands off. You can't go to the client.
Okay.
And also that a organization may not feel comfortable going directly to that law firm. So we can be the intermediary without upsetting that relationship. Some law firms promote it and advocate for lawyers to go to their clients because they know that there's further client engagement, where others are not comfortable with that. No judgment. We can work either way. But most importantly, we can be that intermediary to feel that out as to whether or not that's going to work. And if there is a law firm referral, and this happens quite frequently when we're on a retained search, a law firm referral may come in not from the law firm directly, but from the law firm who knows another lawyer who works in this area. This just happened. And we can measure or evaluate, assess that candidate against the existing pool, against the existing talent that we're looking at. And sometimes it's much more diplomatic for us to give that candidate thanks, but this is not a match for the following reasons, than for the organization to have that conversation with the lawyer directly. So we can be a preventative attribute as a preventative strategy as well.
And I think a lot of people are wondering, how do you protect the confidentiality of the people in the market?
Yeah, we don't get to be in business for 26 years if we're not protecting confidences. Good. It's something that we value, have valued, and hold near and dear. The confidences we don't share internally other than the immediate team who's working on the search. We certainly don't share it externally. And we also, again, have the ability to go into the marketplace confidentially and have conversations, sometimes without giving the company name. There are situations where a lawyer needs to sign an NDA or a CDA before we will disclose the company name. So we do run very confidential searches. So we run confidential searches, but we also honor confidentiality, both from a candidate and from a client perspective.
Well, thank you so much. I love spending time with you, and I learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheryl. It was a pleasure to be here and to spend some time with you as well, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Okay, you have to go.
I do. Thank you. That was a lot of fun. And after viewing it, you want, I don't know, to do it over?